Welcome to our Read series. This series is designed to encourage you to R. Read the Bible, E. Every day, A. Ask questions, and D. Determine to obey. As pastor of Oregon Trail Baptist Church, it's my goal that this time of reflection on the Bible reading from the previous week will serve as an encouragement to you to read the Bible, but will also open up opportunities to share, discuss, and ask questions about what you've discovered in God's Word, that we may grow together. As we renew our minds by the washing of the Word, we desire to draw closer to God and to each other.
Let's have a word of prayer and we'll dive in here this morning. Lord, we thank you so much for your word, and we thank you that truly your word is life for us, for our souls, for it gives us everything we need. And Lord, this morning as we look into your word, we ask that you would open our hearts and minds to truth, give us a hunger and thirst, not simply for knowledge, but to know you and to walk with you. In your Son's name, amen. All right, so I think just because things have not worked so well this morning, I want to double check my stuff. Okay, I think everything's going. All right, we'll start off with a couple questions to be answered, and I just said that, and I was thinking beforehand, this isn't really an answers to questions, and maybe the better way to put this is responses to questions. Okay, does that make sense? Where responses are like, here's a few things to think about. I'm not sure I have a good answer. Okay, so last week we had talked about, there's two things here. We have Genesis 36, why Esau's descendants are called dukes, and then the history of Simeon or Simon. Let's start with Simeon, because it comes first in the text. I know I have backwards on here. Did it just flash? And it wasn't doing that earlier, so I don't know what the projector's doing today. Last year I studied a little bit, for each week. This year I'm like, I should start compiling this into a massive document. So that way when I get the same questions year after year, I can go back to the same material and cover it. So I'm going to jump to kind of some of my notes here that I put together. Just things to note about Simeon. Okay, so let's clear this up. So in Genesis 34, the question stems off if Simeon and Levi had committed this evil act where they wiped out the entire city of Shechem because the king's son or prince of Shechem had raped Dinah, their sister. Okay, so we had talked a little bit about how this led to a curse, which led to Levi, because he was involved in this, being scattered through the tribes of Israel. And in kind of a, I don't want to say ironic, but in a, although they were scattered, they become, as it were, judges of Israel, because they were the ones to sit at the gates and judge. Not to be confused with the tribe of Dan, who is called a judge of Israel, and that's kind of more the idea of a defender of Israel. But anyway, so Donna asked the question, well, what about Simeon? So Levi gets scattered and it becomes the priestly tribe. Well, what happened to Simeon? Because he's involved in this too. And I'm like, that's a really good question. And I had not given much thought to that. So we'll start with his birth. So in Genesis, can you read that there? Do I need to blow it up?
I think B is like
B? Well, these are notes that trigger my mind. They're not polished in any way, so I have Shechem there because I'm remembering the event of Shechem. Okay, does that make sense? So his birth, in Genesis 29:33, Leah conceives, bears a son, okay, and she says, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated. That's actually kind of important. The Lord hath heard that I was hated. He hath therefore given me this son also, and she called his name Simeon. So this phrase, the Lord hath heard, does anybody want to take a stab at the Hebrew word. And you're like, I don't know Hebrew, but it's what I brought up and I've talked about. So just take a guess. It is. Okay, so the Lord hath Shema, he's heard. And so she names her son Simeon, which is a play off of the word Shema. So it means basically the Lord hears. Okay, and so she's recounting in naming her son, God is the one who hears. Okay, so this is very significant to her. Now, we then have the incident where Simeon and Levi wipe out an entire city. Jacob, in that story, in Genesis 34, he says, you've made me to stink among the inhabitants. We talked about that last week. And it was interesting how, although it made Jacob afraid of the people he's living around, what was the exact opposite effect that happened? He thought they would gang up and kill him. And God even turned his evil to good in that they were now afraid of him. And they stayed away. They didn't pester or bother him. Simeon is the one who gets put in jail as kind of a ransom payment in the story of Joseph and his brothers, part of what we read this last week. So Joseph, I don't know why Simeon was the one to put in jail. Where does Simeon fall in the birth order of these 12 sons? Anybody know? Somewhere up at the top, yep. Second is correct. Judah was firstborn, then Simeon. Okay. Then we have an interesting curse, and I'm going to jump there to the passage, Genesis 29, verses 5 to 7. Let me pull that up. Genesis 29. Okay. Now this is a passage where the whole context here is what? What's going on in Genesis 29? Wait, 49. I meant to say 49, Donna. My bad. Okay, yeah. It's Jacob dying, and he's pronouncing blessings, and I think you could say curses at some point on some of the children. What's really ironic is Jacob lives for a lot longer after this. So, he must have been really sick and thought he was dying, and he didn't quite die yet. This is what he has to say of Simeon and Levi. And he lumps these two together. He says, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. My soul come not into their secret, unto their assembly mine honor be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and in their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. What do you think he's alluding to here in this passage? He's definitely hearkening to the past, right? The slaying of a man. Okay. It's not exactly they won't inherit. He says he's going to scatter them in Israel. Which is interesting, because Levi definitely gets scattered, right? But he gets scattered in such a way he's a blessing to the nation. So here, even Jacob's curse on these two for Levi becomes a bit of a blessing. Okay? God kind of, how to say this? He doesn't, this gets into a whole theology of cursing and blessing anyway, where some people have taken this too far that like whatever you say will definitely come to pass. But go ahead.
Well, it wasn't like he was cursing them, he was cursing their anger.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
That's way by obvious when he dealt with their anger and wrath, or they would not have been able to bless.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because we don't really see that pattern with the tribe of Levi. Yeah. Huh. So back to this pronouncement here. Jacob doesn't want to fully identify with Levi and Simeon because of their anger and wrath and what it produces. It talks about their anger, they slew a man. I think that's probably referring to specifically the individual that abused their sister, but also into the whole city, that they just wiped out of Shechem. I see some chin scratching. What's up?
Well, also, I wonder if, to some extent, he was laying a good bit of blame on those two for Joseph.
That could be. I don't know. You are pressing my I have not thought of that. So well, in the next line here, in their self-well they dig down a wall. I have no idea what that's referring to. And that might be a story that Jacob is recalling of them that we don't have in Genesis, However, I have a sneaky suspicion that even though we may not have the story, somehow it might be significant, because it seems to me like God doesn't put things in the text just arbitrarily. Okay, so there's might be something here. I just don't know what it is.
It's kind of interesting that he is so upset with these two sons for revengefully to it.
Mm-hmm.
When he himself did nothing, and it was his daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a parent, I'm curious. Yeah, and yet, perhaps if he had acted, his sons would not have had to act, or felt they had to.
Yeah, that's... And in the end of chapter 34, where that whole thing happens, their response to their dad being upset with them because you made my name stink, and they said, should he deal with our sisters as with a harlot? I mean, it just ends right there. And the sad thing is, you're right, Jacob didn't act when he should have. And should there have been consequences for the sin that had happened there? Yes. But did that mean everybody in an entire city needs wiped out? But isn't that the human pattern? We always want to get even, or we want to get revenge, or we want justice, and somehow in our quest for justice, in our human sinful nature, we tend to go too far. We tend to, bring, more punishment or pain than is actually meted out for the crime. So yeah, Jacob is definitely involved in this too.
To me, it kind of shows how women are not really valued.
No, you're right.
Time, just like with Lot, and offering his daughters.
Yeah, hospitality was more important than his daughter's
Exactly.
security and safety. Yeah, and that is a tragic thing of humanity, and the Bible is not necessarily endorsing that viewpoint. However, it's going to record for us what happened. You have Lot and his daughters, and then you have that same type of thing happening in Judges, where the Levite is coming, and he stops in the house. Was it in Benjamin? And he offers his daughter or his concubine as and so you have the same type of thing happening multiple times. Just a degrading perspective there. Not a godly one, for sure. What I want to take this from is, so this is a little bit of Simeon's life, and we don't have much more of that. So what happens with the tribe of Simeon? Okay, so in Joshua 19, it seems that the tribe's inheritance is put really closely with Judah's territory. Okay, now in Judges 1 verse 3, Judah and Simeon go up together for battle. So Simeon becomes very close to Judah. They fight together. What's interesting, by the time we get to Judges 5, where Deborah and Barak in Judges 4 have had this great victory, God has delivered them. In Judges 5, Deborah is recounting the whole event with a song to remember it and memorialize it for Israel. Deborah doesn't mention Simeon at all in the conflict. They just get left out. And then they begin to, the tribe of Simeon, because of the land area they were given, they seem to be very nomadic and run into several conflicts with other people around them. And part of what happens, they intermarry into both Israelite tribes and non-Israelite tribes, and they have a lot of intermarriage through the biblical story, and it's almost like they get forgotten. They kind of get lost. And if you think about it, when Jacob said, you'll get scattered, well, Levites got scattered in a religious sense, but the the tribe of Simeon almost gets more scattered because of intermarriage with other tribes. And what's interesting is in a couple of the lists of the 12 tribes, Simeon gets dropped out. But they're not forgotten. In Ezekiel 48, they're part of the prophecies of the future land of Canaan. So that's Ezekiel 48 and in chapter 33. And the book of Revelation, when it talks about the 12,000 from each tribe, it lists in Revelation 7:7, 12,000 were sealed from the tribe of Simeon. So they're scattered but not forgotten. And so does that kind of answer the question of what happens to the tribe of Simeon? I had focused on the tribe of Levi before and not thought of Simeon, but that curse of you're going to be scattered, it truly did happen to the tribe of Simeon. But although they were scattered, they were not forsaken. Does that make some sense? Now, did I raise any more questions that, sometimes you have answers that make more questions than they help with. Comments, questions there? All right, Genesis 36, we dealt with, or the question came up about dukes. So, so throughout this passage, we have these are the dukes. These were dukes of the sons of Esau, and it goes on to name them all as dukes. And we were like, okay, why the term duke is being used here as opposed to like prince or king or a thing of that nature. I'm going to say right off the bat, I may not have a good answer to this, and I couldn't find one, but it doesn't mean somebody doesn't have a good one who just knows the languages more than me. So I'm going to preface what I say here. So a couple things I noted in this. Let me see here. Okay, so the term for duke is this word here, and I can't pronounce it, so let's see if the computer can. It might not. Okay. So it's used, okay, boy, I wish I could blow this up. I don't know if you can see this little thing over here, but that little bar there shows me that it's really, so the bars go up where it's got a heavy usage in the book of the Bible. And so it's majorly used in Genesis. I guess I could do it this way. So it's a word, there we go. It's used 43 times in Genesis, and then it really tapers off in biblical literature. Okay? Where else is it used a lot? 1 Chronicles, 13 times, which, I'm going to jump back over here. Here's where it's used in 1 Chronicles, and it's similar. It's recounting the dukes of Edom. Same guys, Chronicles retelling a story, okay? So nothing super abnormal there. Exodus 15 has the dukes of Edom. Okay, so it uses that term as well. So really they're all lumped in about the same way. They're using the same material. The one that's a little odd is this Zechariah. And so let me pop back over here to the word study. In Zechariah, 3 times Zechariah uses this term, but can anybody see how it gets translated in Zechariah? I'm going to zoom in so you can see a little better. Governor. What's really interesting is this term, not just dukes as we have in English, but the Hebrew term seems to be consistently used for the Edomite tribes or Moabite tribes, Esau's descendants. The exception is in Zechariah, where Zechariah is actually using these of governors, which are from the Israelites, governors in the land of Judah, which in that time, don't they already have some external, Babylon and Assyria setting up power? So it seems to me, and I could be wrong here, that it's a term of a leader. Several lexicons call it like a tribal chieftain, to where they may not be a king, but they're ruling like subgroups. And if you think of a governor, governors aren't necessarily the ones totally in charge, but they rule smaller regions, okay? So I'm putting this on the table. This is what I noticed, okay, looking at this. The other thing that became kind of interesting is the term for Ishmael's descendants. So let me open that up. And again, I don't speak Hebrew and I can't pronounce these things. But it's a different word. But it also could mean chieftain or ruler. I'm going to go back, scroll up here. This is a tribal chieftain, the word for dukes. Here's a chieftain ruler. So it sounds very similar to me. But I'm going to pull up how it gets used. Let's see here. It's generally translated as princes, but as we get through like the Numbers passages, princes of Israel, princes of the tribes, it seems like it's more a term used for Israelite rulers. Now, are these kings? No. These are like the heads of a tribe. So, but it's a totally different term. So I was looking at this, but one thing that caught my attention is okay, Genesis 25. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. So this term that's normally used of Israelite tribes is also used at times of Ishmaelite tribes. So it's not like a clear-cut distinction here, okay? And then yes, yeah. So I kind of am wondering if part of this may be like a term for rulers within Israel versus rulers outside of Israel, or if it's a matter of like a language thing, because it seems like these are very similar terms. It led me to look into, okay, when the King James was translating this, what did they think of as dukes? You know, because as they translate, they're trying to put these words into things that fit with, 1611 English. And a duke at that time was royalty and nobility, but not necessarily as high up on the totem pole as someone in line to be the next king. So, right, but they still have power and authority and exert some of those things. So maybe that's what they were thinking when translating. Again, this is a response, and I'm spewing out information because I'm not sure of a good answer. Yeah.
Based on that, it could be that it's exactly why they translate it that way, because Esau and his descendants are not part of the royal lineage.
Right, and so, yeah, so that may be their thought process, in that from the line of Isaac will come the royal descendant, the serpent crusher, the seed of going on to the tribe of David. And here you have, in the Hebrew text, two separate words being used. But it's one of those times where, you can't, I would say these are synonyms. Okay, they're similar words, but they carry different connotation. Okay, and connotation, there's your $10. I'm getting a lot of these $10 words, right? There's your $10 word. Connotation is like the subtle meaning behind a word. Okay, so when we talk to each other, we in English, we use words in a certain way all the time. But sometimes when you're trying to say something, you're like, okay, which word do I want to use? And you're like, if I use this word, that might come off a little harsh, or it might come across judgmental, or it might come across, and you try to find a word that fits the situation well, although if you looked it up in the thesaurus, all these words mean about the same thing, right? And that's where you're picking up the subtle differences between words. Yes, dear?
That really comes into play in a text message.
Yes.
So if it's a somewhat touchy subject or whatever, you really have to be careful with the
Yep.
words you use.
Yes. Yeah. So you understand what I'm saying here. Now, there's a really neat book I have for the New Testament called Synonyms in the New Testament. And it takes these words and it talks about the differences between them. I don't know of a book that does that for the Old Testament. So I'm not enough of a Hebrew scholar to weigh in on this. one other thing I noted here, in my mind, one of the things I wanted to look up was this element of prince, and Jacob, when he wrestles with God, I thought it said something about him being a prince. And so I looked that up. Let's see, what's the passage I had there? Genesis 32:28. And I found this a little odd here. He's wrestling with God, and he said unto him, "What is thy name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and men, and hast prevailed." And I need to throw this out. There's a third word for prince, or for ruler, that's also in here that So I thought, why did this prince not come up in my search when I searched for all the other princes? Because if I go back to the word, it's Genesis, 38, 32. It's not here in this word search. And I'm like, that's a little odd. So let's take a peek at the Hebrew behind this phrase. And again, I know you guys don't know Hebrew. I don't know Hebrew either, but I have a bunch of tools that let me cheat. And if they can let me cheat, at least I can walk you through what I see. All right? So if I hit this word prince, there's dots here. So this right here is a tool called a Reverse Interlinear. And what that is it's connecting the Greek or the Hebrew or Greek text to the English. So it's showing you what word got translated as to what into English. Okay? But it has dots under the three words as a prince. The dots in this tool tell me that it's not there. So it's a bit of an interpretive move in translation. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. So what we do have there is we have this hast thou power, and these have arrows because it's pointing to the word power. And so the word power, the way it gets translated, is hast thou power. So I found it odd. I don't know the full reason behind this translation. But I think that's carried on into a lot of modern translations too. So there might be something with language that I don't understand, and I'm just going to comfortably step back and say, I'm not sure. That's odd. So, yes, that's true. And it is talking about having power with God and with man. And so, if you think about it, princes have authority, and God's here saying you really have authority and power in. He's wrestled with God. So, I see some chuckling here. Go ahead. And that's possible, And that's part of translation is. Okay, I was watching a documentary a while back. So, you ever seen the United Nations meetings on TV or whatever, and they have these headsets so people can hear things in their language in real time? Did you know that a computer is not generally generating those? At least not yet. There's actual people who translate that fast on the fly. Okay? It's actually a trained art. You not only have to learn the language, you then have to learn to be able to speak what you just heard while listening to what you're going to say. That's a hard process, all right? Now, I've been in foreign countries and where we've had to do translations. So if I'm preaching, there'll be a guy standing next to me. And I will say something, and I will pause, and then he will say what I said in a foreign language. Okay? Now that they listen and then they speak. But for the people who do the UN headsets, they don't get that pause. It's just going rapid fire. Now, this is actually interesting. I think I brought this up. There was a mistranslation of something Khrushchev said years ago. And he said something along the lines of, he was speaking in Russian, and he said something along like, "We will bury you." The idea was, he was trying to convey was like, our communism will leave your capitalism in the dust, okay? But the way it got translated was like, more like, we're out to get you, okay? So the translator, it could have went that way, but he missed. And because of how it came out, by the time the American public heard that, it really put him at odds, when that wasn't exactly what he was saying. Now, I'm not speaking to the political tensions between the United States and Russia. That's kind of been going on for a long time. But translation it's a bit of an art and a science. Does that make sense? So here we're not critiquing the text of these evil translators added to God's word. They're trying to give you the best conveyance of the Hebrew for people who don't speak English, Hebrew. So anyway, thought? Yeah. What do you mean by that?
If you take the Greek, we wouldn't say it like that.
Right. They have to move things around. Yeah. Yeah. So there is a couple answers, and I've taken up too much time. Any comments or things you noticed from this week's reading?
Okay.
Or questions, or whatever.
43:11.
43:11. Genesis 43:11.
Okay, you're going back to Israel the second time. Or Israel's going back to Egypt the second time. And it says, if it must be soon now, do this. Take of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry down the men of present, gold, balm, honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds. So the fruit trees were still bearing. They had animals for meat. They just had no grain with the famine. Because this is like going into the second year of the famine.
Yeah. But I really like it how you guys forced me to view the biblical text in ways that I wasn't thinking. And that's that. Well, so I'm gonna riff off of what you were saying. Is that these are the types of things that you're still probably harvesting from trees. But what were they gathering in the storehouses in Egypt? Grain and corn, your agricultural crops, okay? So these, how do I say it?
If they have honey, then that means their bees are
Producing.
producing something.
Right. But like bees today produce off of, like dandelions, and most of us don't eat those. I know they're good for you, but but these are all, to me, it looks like, as I'm reading this list, I feel like they're specialty foods. You know what I'm saying? Like these are, I don't want to say the cream of the crop, but they're more your luxury food items. And in the context here, what are they trying to make sure Joseph?
They're trying to win favor so that he won't kill them all.
Exactly. They're trying to win favor with him. So they're 2 years into this. They're bringing him some of the niceties.
That they have
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
That just kind of pricked me that, their trees are still producing.
Yeah. Which ties into a biblical imagery of trees. In that trees.
Because there's nuts and almonds
Mm-hmm.
and fruits.
Yeah.
So the trees are still producing. There must be enough water for trees to produce.
Right. So.
Unless there is dried fruit.
Oh, that's true. Unless it was dried fruit. How?
Nuts and stuff will store.
Right. How long will dry fruit store? You know.
Shepherds, they follow their flocks.
Yeah. I think whatever they're doing here, they're definitely giving the unique specialty items. Yeah. Which there was also a bit more trade in the ancient world than we think about. So when they were doing archaeological dig in Bethsaida on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, the city of Bethsaida is actually now about 5 miles from where the Sea of Galilee is, which is a bit odd because it was a fishing city, and you wouldn't have a city 5 miles. Well, the lake has shrunk, basically, long story, or sediment has filled in that area. But what they found there was they found fish bones, lots of fish bones, lots of very diverse fish bones. And this is where you got to love nerdy people because sometimes they just find neat things. There were fish bones from Nile perch. But Nile perch are not in the Sea of Galilee. And so what they realized was there were different fish species being imported and brought up all the way from Egypt. And Bethsaida had a fish market where if you wanted Nile perch, you could get Nile perch. Now, that's kind of just blows my mind that they were doing that type of thing back then. So with the spices and honey and myrrh and nuts, this passing on of things that they have in their land, see, it ties into the whole we want favor with Joseph because we want to be able to get grain, the main staple foods, So, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Maybe it's kind of like the stuff we have in our pantry that keeps for a while, but yet we still have to depend on the store or whatever to get our milk and our eggs.
Yeah.
Perishable stuff. Yeah. Which the grains would have stored though, but the crops didn't. Yeah.
When I was in Fiji, was it Fiji or the Philippines? I can't remember. I found it interesting because to me, apples are common. We had 3 apple trees in our backyard. 2 have produced red apples, whatever variety, I don't remember. 1 produced green apples. Okay, apples is something I kind of got tired of. Okay, but when I was overseas, and I can't remember if it was Philippines or if it was, they were like, "Oh, you have apples? Those are so expensive here. Those are so delicious. I'd love to have apples." And I'm like, "You guys have mangoes." I mean, I really enjoyed a fresh mango, and I enjoyed like a mango shake and things like that overseas, and they were cheap because they were everywhere. But what was special to them was apples. And so I wonder if, I couldn't say for sure, I don't know enough. I wonder if Jacob's doing some of that here, knowing that some of these foods are less common in Egypt, and he's sending some of them. They're more delicacies because they're rare. We're just now starting to see some fruits here in America that I saw back in 2006 over in Asia. For instance, dragon fruit. Have any of you seen dragon fruit in stores or the? It's like if you take a kiwi and a pear and you cross the two, you get this weird looking. Well, that's the flavor. Let me see if I can pull up a picture of one. Yeah, it looks really weird. Okay, so, yeah. Oh, that's not going to work. Oh, maybe it will. Yeah. So that's what it is, okay? It doesn't grow in America, but it kind of tastes like a cross between a kiwi and a pear. All right? We're starting to see those now, but I don't think we saw them 20 years ago. Yeah. And it looks so odd on the outside, but anyway, I wonder if that type of idea in the ancient world is what's happening, and I don't know the nuances. So, right. Well, and for their own daily consumption too. I mean, agriculture. Let's see here. The time of Abraham. You guys are hitting just several different things in my mind, and you guys are really good at that. You have an easy one on top of that, or? Oh. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a map here. Yeah, and I think there's an element there too, if there's some wealth Jacob has, because God has blessed him. And he's going to still, have some of these things. So Ur of the Chaldees, we're going to go with this. This is the southern Ur. There's another theory that it's up here. This, can you see my mouse pretty well? Okay. This triangle here is basically desert. Okay, you could cross through it, but you didn't always want to go that way. Now, when Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, he came up to Haran and then down into the land. So it seems like that's the route he followed. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is I was watching a documentary years ago. Ur of the Chaldees, about 3000 BC, maybe 2500 or so, they'd started the whole process of irrigation. So instead of being nomadic and just randomly going around, once you start cultivating crops, you kind of tie yourself to one location because you're not going to plant crops and then leave. Okay. Well, what had happened, and about the time of Abraham, which is kind of interesting, they had been irrigating so much with water that they didn't realize was slowly sterilizing the land. So about the time Abraham left was the peak of an agricultural revolution in Mesopotamia, this region here is called Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. Abraham left at about the peak of that, so he's about 20. Abraham's dating, from my understanding, is about 2166 BC would be his birth. Okay, he left about the peak of that, and within the next 500 or so years, much of their cities they literally abandoned because their fields became worthless. And so they didn't realize they were sterilizing the land. God pulled Abraham out at a good time, which is also interesting because this is a time period when what nation becomes very powerful? Egypt down here becomes very powerful. So while these nations of Mesopotamia and Old Babylon, you might say, they're having trouble because of food. And one of my history professors put it very well. No civilization can thrive without an abundance of food. Think about it. If there's not enough food to go around, what do people devote their time and energy to? Food. Whether it's crops or hunting or fishing, And so the only way a civilization thrives is when there's enough people to work in the agricultural or food industry and allow other people to work in other things. Okay? And you can say, well, arts and things like that, but think about it. I'm really glad we have people like mechanics to fix our cars and they save us time, or electricians. We're in an interesting spot in history where as Americans, we've gone from, in the last about 30 years, we've gone from about 40 to 60% of our population having some connection to an agricultural farm. Okay, so in the last really about 50, 60 years, we've gone from people having some sort of a connection to a farm to today less than 2% of our population has any occupation to do with farming. Which is really interesting. Now granted, the farmers today have tractors and equipments to do a ton more. One person can do a whole lot more work. But what has that done with the general perspective people have of food and farming? You take it for granted, and we have people so ignorant they think beef comes from the grocery store. You know what I'm saying? That's where they get it, but that's not where it starts. So all that to say, agriculture drives society and culture. This isn't as much of a biblical lesson, I guess, on this point. God moved Abraham at a unique time. And back to the Joseph thing. God uses famines to really get the attention of nations and people. And he seems to be doing that in this passage. And it kind of... Famines and floods. Yeah. And fires. Yeah. Famines, floods, and fires. That sounds like a good sermon somebody should preach at some point. So, any other comments, questions, things you noticed this week? Good question. Yeah. Oh, that's been discussed. The question was, do we know how long the plagues lasted? As we read them in the Exodus story, it sounds like they were just boom, 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 back to back, week after week. Scholars have debated on whether it took about a month to a few months on the plagues to maybe a few years on the plagues, and just that happening. I don't want to stretch it out so far that it seems unrelated, because as Moses is writing Exodus, he's really giving us the key story. But I think it was short enough that in the Egyptian and Israelite minds, they connected all these as an act of God, But it had to be long enough to cover all the various seasons, because another thing happening with the plagues is each plague is a way that God was showing his dominance over an Egyptian god. So there was an Egyptian god tied to each plague of, like, this is the god of frogs, and this is there's a god of the different Egyptian pantheon. And so it seems like there was this systematic going through and God saying, yeah, you think this little God's in charge of this area of your agriculture and life? Well, I can decimate that. And you think this God's over this area? I can decimate that. So I think part of that's what's happening. And so you have seasons there. And ultimately ends with Pharaoh, who Pharaoh himself in Egyptian, I don't want to say theology, but in their religious thinking, Pharaoh was a god. And he was tied or connected to Ra, the sun god, and some of these other things. And so whose firstborn would die? Even Pharaoh, the guy in charge. You know, the god who's supposed to provide the life for Egypt and the lifeblood of Egypt. All the firstborn of Egypt will die, including him. So I don't really know how long it would be. I'm comfortable with the idea of it took about a year. But again, our Exodus story is condensing that down. So, but good. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
I just noticed in Genesis 46 one interesting little side bit where talking about Simeon and Levi, how upset they were at Shechem and all that.
Right.
But down in verse 10 it says, and the sons of Simeon were Jemuel and Jalen and Ohad and Jacob and Zohar and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman.
Yeah.
He had his own little affair.
Yep. Yeah. And that's one of the texts that is like right off the bat, Simeon, he's marrying outside of the tribes, you know. So yeah, it's one of those things. I read several dictionary articles and several brought up several points, and I'm like, okay, how do I condense this? But yeah. Well, let's close out in a word of prayer. And this week, as we dive in, let's see here, we'll continue the story in Exodus and then on into Matthew. Let me encourage you a little. I don't know why, but I tend to spend most of my time on Old Testament stuff. So please don't be afraid to jump New Testament. So we seem to be talking Old Testament all the time, but not new, and it builds up to the new. I'll say that. And so, anyway, Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you that, Lord, even like with Simeon, as we look at a character in Scripture who, in anger, slays an entire city. He marries foreign women, and his line really follows that trajectory. And yet, you're not done with him. Even in the book of Revelation, he shows up there with 12,000 from his tribe. Lord, we ask that you would encourage us this week as we read more stories of brokenness of humanity. Lord, would you remind us that you're the God who's in control. You're in control of our lives, just as you were in control of their lives. And Lord, this week, as we continue on into the Exodus story of your people, Lord, these are the people you chose to work with. You gave special revelation to. You fought on their behalf. You enabled them, and yet they turned from you. And what a reminder it is for us. We ask this week that you would day by day just open your word to us, speak to us from it, and help us to apply it to our own hearts and lives. We ask this in your Son's name.